to Higher Density Living. You're here with your host, Alexander McKeag, and we have a special guest today. We're speaking with Travis Kellerman. So, Travis, really happy to have you here, and I know that we had shared some points on what you wanted to talk about, so I think we do a little bit of an intro on you, who you are, why the hell you're in Albuquerque. And then from that, I think we dive into some of the deeper thoughts that are going on in your head, so that we can express that journey and those lessons that you've learned with a lot of our listeners. So please dive in and tell us about yourself.
Thanks for having me on, Alex. I'm consider myself a native New Mexican. I keep coming back here. I've traveled around the world. More recently, took a big American road trip, and there's some kind of spiritual connection to New Mexico for me. So the reason I'm here is moving from Pennsylvania when I was 15. My parents were looking for a place to retire and sort of be in the sun.
Sure.
And this place has that, certainly. It came to be that we were in a small town, Silver City, the southwest part of the state, only about 12,000 people. And that felt claustrophobic.
Yeah. Everybody knows each other.
Too much.
It's like, get out of my business for a second.
I did some rebelling and got in a little bit of trouble, but for the most part, it was just forcing creativity. I realized people in small towns, places in between the major cities, they don't have a lot of the instant entertainment and options, so they create their own. And I really came to appreciate that. I do appreciate my time there. I came out of my shell, and I also learned about New Mexico. Didn't know how to roll R's, still can't do that, but I was, for the first time, I considered a minority, and more people spoke Spanish than spoke English, or at least as their first language, it seemed. And all these last names were the original Spanish founding families, mixtures of that and some of the other original settlers. And here I was coming from the East Coast and Pennsylvania, the East Coast, as you know, very just different culture, but still in the same country. New Mexico, in a way, is a totally different place, I feel.
It's almost, people are like, oh, New Mexico, is that like a territory of the United States? It's like, no, but it does, in one aspect, it feels like a different world. And you talked about that spiritual draw that you have. Now, what do you mean by that? Is it just the geology, the geography of the area? Is it the people? Is it the culture? What is it that has that magneticness to it, that magnetism that keeps drawing you back to this place? Is that just a gut feeling? Is it something that just tells you I need to continue to settle myself here? Like, what is that?
It is in my gut. It's in the land, the open spaces especially.
The vistas, yeah.
It's so easy to get there. I hate to use the word escape, but when you don't want to feel the density, pardon my reference to...
No pun intended, huh?
To too many people in a city. Even a smaller city like Albuquerque, you're a few minutes away. There's very little traffic, just all the kind of cliche things about having a more wide open space. But once you're out there, you choose, do you want to continue to be in the high desert? Do you want to be up in the mountains? Do you want to find water? Do you want to be somewhere surrounded by pine trees, lush green? There's wild animals. There's still the frontier here.
Yeah.
So for me, it's a refuge of that, this potential and possibility. It's not clearly defined. And in a way, we have a lot of history, but we don't see a lot of similar future to the rest of the country.
I think that's interesting. That's also it's also a very big draw for me, right? This is an interesting area because we have the labs here. We have this high technology. And at the same point, you have, the culture and history of the Pueblos and the very raw, fertile volcanic land. There's over 600 volcanoes here in the state of New Mexico. A lot of people don't know that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. No, yeah. And it's quite interesting. So it's like it's a portion of the earth that is constantly in birth, constantly in growth. There's a constant influx of energy of new life coming in this area. And the cool part about that, and that is a draw for me. And when I see these vistas, like these areas that I can go to, it's always a journey to go to that point. But there's always choice involved. Everything is always at your own risk. There's a sense of freedom here, expansive freedom. In terms of that alignment with who I am and my spirituality, right? How I feel about my consciousness, that is something that is more coherent with what it means to be a human being in my eyes. And I think that's why I'm here. And from what I'm hearing from you, like those draws, having those choices, that's important, because choice determines that free will, and we all have that choice. And the fact that you've chosen to recognize it, right, and then adopt that nature, that view, that perspective of what you're talking about has caused you to stay here in New Mexico. And I think that's fantastic.
I feel a sense of freedom that in a lot of ways we're not defined. I don't feel predefined or defined here, so I can realize who I really am. And I'm not sure what that means. That's the whole point of it, that I have that freedom to explore. Also, it's incredible how well preserved things are here.
Yeah, but that's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up.
Cars don't rust. I drive an old 65 Buick, and it feels like it's natural. It's not something special. It's special to me because it feels like moving history or moving art, but it's not anything out of the ordinary. You see a lot of cars here, a lot of older trucks that are used because that's what is still functional, and it's kept its purpose. It's a thing, it's transient, but it's maintained. I like that. It's not wasteful.
It's not wasteful, and I think it defines more purpose in the object, rather than the objects that we have typically being attached to it and finding replacement in it. You know, it causes things to lose identity within themselves quite quickly, whether or not you want to attach yourself to that identity. I think the longevity of items here almost forces you not to maintain a focus on these tangible objects, but things that are actually more important, because you're not worried about replacing these things all the time. They're there for a little bit longer of a lifespan, so it actually draws your attention away from, I got to get a new car, I got to get a new cell phone, I got to get a new house, I got to get a new this. It's almost like the necessity, the spotlight of it isn't on that point. It actually is on the geography. It is on what it means to be a person, right? Define that identity and define who you are. And it affords you that time of focus. And I think that would be a nice bridge or transition into what you actually wanted to discuss today. And that's, I think we would start on the male ego itself, right? And I know that you are currently authoring a book. It's unfinished, and it's in its third draft, if I remember correctly.
Good memory.
Can you give us a little bit of a background on not only the book itself, right, but why you have chosen to actually concoct and scribe down in your mind this book? What is the true purpose? Is it for others? Is it for yourself? Can you actually delve into that for a second?
Thanks for asking, because I've struggled with this, and I feel inherently this guilt around writing some kind of memoir. When what right do I have to do that? What life have I lived that's worth talking about? And the idea of this, now that I'm in this third iteration, I keep coming back to what I feel is more honest and true, and what I really think needs to be said. That describing my own complexity will help men understand theirs. So really being honest, facing the darkness, the anger, the sadness, the feelings of not being capable enough, not being worthy of things, really, really deep, hard issues and pain that I feel a lot of men aren't allowed to express, and it's tragic, and it results in a lot of really terrible effects and outcomes. So my hope is that it helps other men understand themselves, but really the frame here is it's about my own complexity, because I know I have a right to write about that. And the more honest I am in really facing and opening up, being vulnerable, telling what is actually going on in my head, and not putting on a facade, not practicing what I learned in politics or the startup world or anywhere where you're not allowed to be authentic. There's an incentive to put on a certain persona and hide anything that's perceived as weak. Stripping that away and really getting down to the root of what's going on in your head and what the effects of that are, and then drilling back to maybe the root causes of it. If I can do that with myself, it's really difficult, and it's hard work that I think others might need help doing too.
No, I think using yourself as an example, for yourself is a fine example for everyone else and what they should be doing. Because what you find is that your reflection, essentially a diary of prose for what is going on in the depths of your mind, its structure, your consciousness, how you feel about your own reality and your ego itself. That is a teachable moment for you, but at the same time, regardless of the different learning experiences that you go through, those archetypes are shared with what other people go through. Even though there might be a different flavor to it, that struggle, that search for that identity, that search for understanding, you'll be able to show people how to do that. And whether or not, your stories are, taken literally, if they're taken figuratively, or if someone from a standpoint of perspective uses your book as almost like a workbook or a checklist for how they should go through the steps to kind of reflect on themselves. I think it's a very important teach, learn, teach method. There's a balance to what you're actually doing. And this is something that we repeat often, on the show, is that we're all here to teach and to learn and teach. Life is about learning lessons. And this is a function of that catalyst that you need to learn for yourself. And that's why, from what I'm hearing, is it's so deeply important to you to understand that ego, your own journey, but the fact that you're taking the time to reflect on it, that is a skill that a lot of people tend to overlook. And so the fact that you've done that shows a massive amount of self-awareness. And those are the first steps to really understanding what it means to be a human being, what it means to understand, to have that spirit. What is the spirit? What is the ego of who I am, right? What is the I am? What is the Travis? And the fact that you're taking those steps, makes a world of difference for your life. And then the people that will read it, and I'm sure they will, that'll make a mound of difference for them.
I appreciate that support, because part of this frame is struggling with this imposter syndrome, it's been called, but also what right do I have to talk about myself? In politics, I've learned that I'm comfortable campaigning for others, preaching other ideas, really pushing a solid platform or even a party or a person, because I can offload the responsibility and the attention on myself. And the same in business. I can push a product, push a company and a team and support a team. But when it comes to representing myself, there's a strange kind of guilt. It's a learned guilt, the things I've picked up over my life that tells me I'm not allowed to do that. That's
interesting. It's almost like it's funny, you're playing both roles of victim and perpetrator, which it's a dynamic created in your mind only. I'm not sitting here across the table telling you can't talk about your fucking self. You can say whatever you want about you. You know what I mean?
In fact, you're pushing me to do it, and I'm still questioning if that's okay.
And the thing is, you're questioning if it's okay, right? And then I'd have to ask you, and this is not like a therapy session here, but why is it that you are questioning it? What is it? Is there a written rule or policy that defines what you can or cannot say about yourself or the way you think? Do you think that, it makes you any less of a person, or, for instance, a man in your own ego, because you're sitting here challenging yourself and you're challenging the idea of challenging yourself? I know that might sound, a little strange, but that's what you're getting at. And so the question is, are you being hypocritical by thinking you shouldn't be sharing something that you have every right to do so?
We're talking about the male ego, what that term makes me think of, and I'm actually practicing it right now, is generalize it into psychology or some kind of agreed upon way to judge yourself, and then it's okay to do that, instead of thinking about your own complexity and the things that have affected you. So as you said, there's shared experiences here, there's shared effects, and there's a reason there's syndromes and descriptions of shared traumas, and we identify that, and we say this community has experienced the same things, and we should look for signs of these behaviors, because that's something that human psychology, we understand that happens. But it also takes away the individual struggle and the details and variables that are unique to that person. So what I'm getting back to is that it's okay to set that aside, to appreciate that helps us understand each other. But what really helps us understand ourselves is honoring our unique stories. and not thinking we have to be any given film character or storybook character or any image or identity that we were told a man should be or a person should be, that we are our own journey, our own story. And that sounds a little cheesy, but really when you dig into it, there's so much there's a rich collection of stories that only you have to tell. And you can show that and represent that in the world. And when I get in those moments, I feel that passion. I light up because I'm either hearing someone's real self and their stories, what's behind the stories they're telling, and what's some of the causes of that. I'm seeing their complexity, and I'm able to share my own. That feels like real human connection and expression and love, and I thrive off that. Every time I get excited, that's what it is.
Well, that's the true flow, man.
I'm even getting there right now.
Well, that's that moment. That's when, and we've shown this, that's when consciousness, right? That's when the brainwaves are actually syncing up. That's when I'm sitting here in Travis's energy, and Travis is sitting in mine, and we're actually becoming one in this conversation, energetically. There's an emotional sharing between the both of us that we can both understand. So that means for that brief moment, or prolonged moment, you and I are both feeling that same thing, an indescribable thing. You may call it one thing, and I may call it the other in its definition for how we see the world, but the way it's being felt, that's a shared feeling. And that's an important thing to look at, and the ego itself, however you want to say it, okay, we're trying to understand who we are. And you're saying if someone is also going through that complexity of who they are, and they found that honesty within themselves, and they found the power, the comfort to share it with another person, that is, in my mind, light years ahead of most other people that are saying it's more important for me to go to the gym and lift weights and look like some, big ox, but never for a moment reflect on who I truly am and figure out who I really, how I am defined, as a human being. There's none of that self-reflection. It's more of the physical image. But the physical image, even if you're in New Mexico, it will wither over time. Rust always comes into that physical attribute. But the thing that always stays is that energetic resonance. It's the quality of who you are as a human being. It's the stories people remember about how you acted as a person with purpose, with passion, right? That nature, that's the thing that people hold on to. Not how many hours you put in the gym and how you looked. That will be forgotten. Just as quickly as the cells die off and they forget how to hold themselves together. So, is it emasculating at that point then? Is it more emasculating to go to the gym and not focus on who you are as an individual? Does it say that I'm more of a male if I, like you had said before, if I'm doing jujitsu, if I'm outside doing hunting, if I'm eating steak, if I'm thin and flexible, or I'm, strong and rigid, at what point is that definition, which truly is the thing that is emasculating, and is it bad to be emasculated in the eyes of how people define how a man should be at that point? I don't know, but that opens up the question, to look at it. Like we had talked about briefly before we came in here, if I'm lifting weights in a gym, is it the same as me creating labor to create some sort of object? Like if I was in a quarry moving stone? Yeah. Or if I'm practicing jujitsu and no blood is actually drawn, there's no nationalistic purpose for it to like protect a country, or do anything like that. Is it just as important to practice the moves of what someone would do in combat, and say that is just as masculine as someone actually drawing blood? Or do I have to draw blood? Do I actually have to harm another individual? Is that a defining factor to say I'm more of a man? To impose power over somebody else, to say that you're greater than the other? When truly, in fact, with the definition of physics, we all come from the same place. So then it would just be a perspective of the mind to say that, I'm above that other person. It's a function of hierarchy at that point. And I don't know, what would be your thoughts on that in terms of that hierarchy and the ego and what we choose to do and how we kind of frame, how we define ourselves to others and our own ego?
That distraction of working out or maximizing some image that we've agreed, or that's been spread in popular culture, that this is what a man is, or this is what it takes to be strong.
Right.
This is what makes you better. And this idea of good and bad and better, it's so contextual, yet it's it's so untrue. And what I feel like is men in particular, which is why it's important to talk about that we find it so hard to relate.
Why is
find
that?
It so hard to be true.
Can you break that down? Why do you think it's so hard for us to relate?
I'm not going to blame society or do these generalizations, but I see that happening more and more, and it's almost a cliche life cycle. For example, jiu-jitsu, there's after you drill repetitions of a new move, you're done with the instruction. There's often a period where you do what's called rolling, and that's essentially sparring. So you're faced off against, usually you pick someone else your size, but usually it's just kind of an open mat, and you can choose who you want to compete against. And it is a competition, but it's supposed to be about further learning, putting to practice what you've learned, trying things out, having respect for someone else. When you're put into a situation like this, I think it's a very good example, because I can see when I go to an open mat, for example, who is in what place in their mind, who is trying to represent something that they're not. I can feel their insecurity. I can literally feel their nervousness.
It's palpable in the air.
They're shaking.
It's an energetic signature. Yeah, absolutely.
And they don't make eye contact. And they're trying to be strong. And they feel like we're in this battle instead of we're trying to learn from each other.
Interesting.
So the default is to look for conflict, expect conflict, engage in that conflict. And then based on the outcome, someone's better and someone's worse, or someone's greater, someone's stronger, someone's more or less of a man, instead of the real humble appreciation that everyone has for the instructor or the higher ranks, who usually don't have any of that. If they've made it that far and they're truly a teacher, they're not trying to best anyone. They're not trying to put anyone down. They're trying to get everyone to learn, and they're trying to learn themselves. So that means submitting. That means accepting that you're not good at this certain move.
Sure.
Or trying to let someone in and explore what they're doing. It's a chess match, but it's respectful. You're not, the stakes aren't your worth.
I think that that as a metaphor for proper education, okay? Because even if you continue to be the best, if you look at it from a sense of hierarchy, right? You'll never learn what it means to fail. You never learn what it means to be the emotion of the person on the other side, sensing that, this person may be better than me. Those continual learnings, those continual failures brings you to a point of victory. It gives you that catalyst to actually show yourself, what a limitation might be, what needs to be learned in this moment. Is there truly a hierarchy, right? What is that learning dynamic? How do I associate myself, or comparatively stand against another person who's standing there in the same gi, of the same, physical makeup, right? And here for the same purpose, but I'm saying that this person may be of a better stance than I am, because they practice something, one direction more than I have the other, because I'm not the expert in it, but you still have to stand there and learn. But for the person that continues to win over and over, you almost lose sight of the fact that you've missed that other feeling or function of what those other people might feel like. And it's not, I'm not sure it's a sense of fragility of like maybe the ego itself, but it's just thinking that someone might be less than the other because of the breadth of time that have gone into their system of learning. So when you talk about the masters in jiu-jitsu, their interesting dynamic is that they understand the learn, teach, learn, and what it means to give up, to submit at that point, right? Because there's a point of learning in that submission. It doesn't make you any less of a person. It doesn't make you less of a man to tap out at that moment and say, guess what? I can't handle what you're doing. Because you've taken that self-reflection, a physical self-reflection of the limitation of what you can handle. And that tapping is a physical representation of being like, okay, I accept that fact. And I think that's a really interesting dynamic, and that happens over and over and over as you continue to practice. Am I wrong? I don't do jiu-jitsu.
This relates to your mention of hierarchy.
Yes.
You can tell when someone's in a very competitive mindset, and there are jiu-jitsu competitions. I've competed myself, and it's intense. You need to prepare for it. You do a training camp. You work with other people who are in that same they have that same goal, so they're working in the same competition.
Right.
And that's what you train up to. And you take it seriously, and it's a challenge, and it's it's a thrill to do that. It's very dedicated, and you cut weight, and you learn your own system, and you have your own approach, and you think about your strategy, how you're going to take them down, how you're going to gain points, what you're going to do if they get this move on you or put you in this position. So you work on escapes, and you have this whole system and strategy, and it's a very, very much a bonding element too, because you might have a team that shares those same styles and that
cool.
same strategy. That all drops away. The hierarchy here is when that continues outside of these set competitions, and a man feels that he has to maintain his superiority at all costs. Then every role becomes about domination. Every role becomes about proving superiority. And if you think about how unsustainable that is, that's something that exists in, I'm thinking about hierarchies where, like the Microsoft culture in the 90s.
Think about Wall Street.
Backstabbing, just very lecherous, and always looking to get the promotion over someone else or tear someone else down to take their spot. It's unsustainable. But if you suspend yourself from that, if you take yourself out of it and become wise, and you're not competing, you're just trying to help everyone, then you become a resource that is undeniable and almost infinite, because you're not challenged, and you don't participate in that.
Then let me ask you, when you remove the aspect of competition in everyday life, if you look at it as a balance, that there is no other, that there's a shared identity and experience that we all have, do you feel like you writing the book gives you a moment to take on that third-party perspective of who you are and how you interact with others? That way you can actually see that this book that you're writing gives you a moment to actually step outside of yourself.
Which is so scary, because it's the most unknown. When you have an objective view of yourself,
correct,
I think, who is Travis? This is a crazy person. Mm-hmm. But then comparing myself to the true complexity of others, we all have these thoughts likely, but we don't talk about them because we're so scared to be seen as different and insane, or be labeled as someone who's not worthy and not worthy of community, not reliable, or in contradiction, hypocritical. And that's a big trigger for me is, what if I find hypocrisy? How could I live with myself? What if I find something that I don't like? And of course, I find those things.
But don't you feel like those very difficult, emotionally charged points of self-reflection, don't you feel that those carry the strongest points of learning for yourself, though? Because you're like, I don't like that. Why don't I like it? Why have I chose to live like that? Was it a lack of self-awareness that brought me to that point? And where does the fear actually lie in that self-reflection?
And if it traces back to something petty from childhood, seemingly ridiculous, mm-hmm. that makes me feel ridiculous. But that's why. And how ridiculous to not confront that.
Absolutely.
What's really silly is thinking that you would let that pattern continue and you would let it dictate your life based on some slight you had, some bullying, some feeling of being set out from a community or being left out or abandoned.
Ostracized, excommunicated, whatever you want to call it, any of those things.
That fear reaches up from the age of 3, 4, 10 and commands you now at the age of 35, what have I gone through in the past 10 years that I look back and say, I was just that little boy. I'm actually not a man because I'm letting myself be that little boy in the worst way. It's not about exploring my creativity. That's a whole nother thing. Accessing that the best parts or the real parts of who I was as a little boy. That realness, that honesty, that non-judgment. I love that, but it comes with all these potential, call them triggers and traumas that dictate other parts of my behavior and my life that I want to separate those and view them objectively.
Sure. And do you think that through viewing that objective view, do you think that makes you any less of a man than you should be? From learning who you truly are, do you think that makes you less of a human being? Do you think that degrades your ego, in any aspect? Does it make you less than a guy who goes to the gym? I mean, I'm a vegan. I do yoga.
Yeah.
I'm relatively thin. I'm tall. I have, my face has some feminine features and I have long hair. But does that make me any less of a man in what society defines as a man? Or at least the masculine energy? Because I believe that, life should have a balance of feminine and masculine. There's a huge amount of power in both of those.
I wouldn't say that I'm gaining enlightenment, but I will say I'm much less judgmental than I was a few years ago.
About yourself or about others?
Both.
Interesting.
And it would have made me chuckle to say, oh, Alex has a man bun. He'll never eat a steak.
And why is it called a man bun? Why can't I just say Alex has a bun on his head? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Alex pulls his long hair back and keeps it out of his face. And that's really functional. And that's conventionally manly, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. But what are these definitions that I have? Why do I feel like I have to work on my car myself? Why do I feel like getting my hands greasy and dirty is some sign of accomplishment? When really having the humility to ask for someone's help in certain situations is not just more practical, but it's healthier, it's better, it's more manly in a way, because I'm relating, I'm bonding, I'm asking for help and receiving it, I'm giving and receiving, I'm being real.
And your book, I always believe that we are our own best teachers. And your book, I believe, from my own viewpoint, you're asking yourself for help. Because that internal part of you, through the deepest points of reflection, when you begin to look at it, it teaches you what you need to know. It taught you what was silly to hold on to. It shows you what those fears are. Essentially, you're asking yourself for help. You don't need any outside people to help you learn a lesson to overcome something that was defined in your own mind. You constructed that. So deconstructing it, you're the only person that has those tools to pull it apart board by board.
It's the best application of self-reliance.
Yeah.
The worst or the extreme of that is thinking that needs to be pervasive. And I've felt that for years at a time, where I'm alone. I can't share anything. I can't ask anyone for help. Others trust me, but I can't trust them.
Yeah.
Because I can't put that burden on them if I'm struggling with something. So to be self-reliant in that extreme means removing yourself from any hope for love, any hope for bonding and friendship, real friendship between other men. In this case, it feels like you don't want to be seen as weak. You want to be seen as the strong, silent type, if you will, but also just someone who doesn't need anything, has everything under control, and that's unsustainable. It's completely unrealistic. Every person out there, no matter what their public identity is, every man struggles with deep pain. And I think that's because they, especially in those positions, are forced to suffocate it. They don't feel like they can share. So for me, this is it's a scary adventure, and it's a journey around facing that and trying to make up for all those years that I didn't share. If you don't do that, this is what happens, and what might happen in the future if you don't address it. Thinking about that is the first step, that awareness. Confronting it is hard, and then what you discover, what you learn from yourself in the process, to me so far has been this incredible eureka moment after eureka moment. It's like an intelligence custom built for me.
That's exactly what we talk about, right? And we speak about this in the show constantly. You are your own greatest teacher. You are your own greatest intelligence. Everything you need to be learned can be learned inside of you, right? Learned or unlearned. And by unlearning something, you're actually learning. So it's an interesting dynamic how it plays both sides, right? It's almost like a paradox that's been solved. You are the paradox. So dealing with that polarity, it seems that you've moved yourself closer to that balance point. And you understand now how to find that balance and understand, where is the actual worth and the causality of an event that might happen because of a choice that I've made, right? And was it wrong to make that choice, or was it right to make that choice? And, I would typically say that it was neither wrong or right. It was neither masculating or emasculating. It was just a lesson that needed to be learned. And what you're saying is these eureka moments, you've found a fantastic tool for yourself to find these eureka moments over and over and over. to find that Archimedes principle, right? The balance of you being in the tub, and how do you float in that water being that reality that's around you, how you perceive it.
Something I've struggled with is what I see as the simplification of people, so blame in particular.
Blame's interesting.
Labeling someone in the simplest binary of good and bad.
Sure.
Without taking into account the complexity of that person, but also the context in which that action happened.
Well, you can never truly know that context.
It's impossible, yet we judge it. And I understand the practicality of simplifying things to say, okay, we need a judicial system. We need a legal code. We have to punish some people under this code to protect other innocent people from these negative behaviors and effects and actions. But those are short-term and temporary controls, and they're not addressing the root problem. Because the more I learn about myself and the more I see others in that same way, trying to remove judgment and get down, it used to make me so angry, and it still does sometimes, that you're not understanding that there's I firmly believe this. Every person has a unique algorithm, a unique complexity. They have this series of traumas and childhood experiences that led them exactly to this point and the decisions they're making. That there are states of hunger and stress and lighting, and even more subtle things. Something that someone said sets off a connection to this desperate survival hormone release, and they can't control. I truly believe that what they do next in those coming moments, that you can see why that happened. Now, it's not that it might not have a negative effect, but addressing the root cause of that is what makes that go away.
Otherwise
punishing them for that behavior.
A continual cycle of a behavior, and whether it's through ignorance because they don't understand the tool of using themselves to actually focus on those things they need to be focused on, to leave those cyclical patterns that find themselves in that poverty, that stress, that sense of being ostracized or different, right? You've put yourself in that point. Nobody ever has power over you to define how you feel or think about something. You've just created choice over and over and over in this repetitive, heavy algorithm. This algorithm of perspective has ingrained itself in the programming of your mind, frankly. And it almost erodes the character, the nature, the spirit of who a person is. It makes you feel like you don't have that free will. It makes you feel like you don't have that choice. So you never take the moment or the step to be like, wait a minute, I can leave this. I don't have to feel like this. I don't have to live in this cycle. I can step out of it. It's self-perpetuating. I created it. Moving to that point is interesting. And then I'd have to wonder, is it that simple? Well, frankly, the complexity of all of us, yes, there are many different dynamics, right? There are many different ways we look, think, act, and feel. But if we bundle all those together, it is a quite simple theme. We all share complexity. We all share perspective. We all share a journey. That is simple, regardless of what different steps or chaotic events happen within all those movements. Whether if you physically lose an arm or keep it your entire life, right? There's changes in the physical body. So regardless of the complexity, there's a simplicity to it. So now, is it wrong then at that point to simplify the perspective of looking at the world that, someone is just another reflection of me, that they are that mirror. They're going through that period of learning. Whether or not they figure it out in this lifetime or next one, they're trying to figure it out through these catalysts of change, even though they don't see the outcomes directly from the choices they're making. Is it wrong to simplify things in that light? Does that erode the weight of what you're talking about in the learning, to say that the simplification of our world and how we view things, is that emasculating at that point?
I don't know about emasculating, but I think there's danger in... So it's helpful to always see them in that light, because you strip away judgment, or you come back to this compassion that lets you understand them. I do feel, though, and I appreciate your philosophy of seeing lessons learned from life cycle to life cycle. This is an infinite journey, and this continues beyond this life. I like that, and I have some nuance there maybe, but I feel like there also needs to be a respect for the struggles of this life.
Oh, absolutely.
And we have so much difference between us in even you and I, that no matter where we are and what we've had to work through and live through, we do have this shared capacity as humans. But there are some circumstances that take so much more compassion, I believe, and they take so much more energy from the person. They shorten lifespans, they shorten potentials, and that lesson becomes that much harder to learn. That if they're learning a hard lesson in this life cycle, I have to appreciate, and I can feel my empathy be triggered, because I want to understand it. At the same time, it's almost unbelievable that someone has to experience that. So even in this modern age where we have everything we need, supposedly, we have enough to eat, for the most part, the world's populations are getting better. They have more of their basic needs met. There's still a lot of cognitive crime, I would say. So that's capturing someone's mind. Even if it's just for a period of time when they're using a social media application, or they're engaged in this behavior that they think they have to do to satisfy someone else's metrics. That happens a lot in the attention economy.
Right.
So something you're working on with your company, that's honoring the complexity of someone's behavior.
Yeah.
It also shows en masse where we're spending our time, where our attention is going. And I think there's a lot to be said for what the effects of that are that aren't being addressed. So when someone is dealing with intergenerational trauma and things from their past that other people can't truly understand the effects of, we're not equal at that level. There are differences there, and they have to be respected, because I'm not able to identify, but by sharing my journey, we can understand and honor each other's complexity, that regardless of what we've gone through, there's a potential for negative effects to come out of it.
Right. And I think that focus is not even so much as a commiseration, right? But that mental deprivation from not focusing on those things is doing a bigger disservice to mankind and the development of who we are evolutionarily. I don't know what it's like to be an orphan, or at least I don't remember. If you consider it from a point of reincarnation, I don't know if I have to learn that lesson. Maybe some people, you spend so many lifetimes just not figuring it out. It's like, I need to choose the hardest lesson possible for myself, the most difficult physical struggle, so that hopefully I get it. Hopefully I don't have to live that existence again, and I can internalize the lesson that has been learned. And you are just inking down those internalizations of the lessons that you have learned. And I think there's beauty in that mental and spiritual evolutionary process. And I love the fact that you're actually documenting it for yourself.
You've talked before about how dreams help you understand yourself.
Correct.
The waking life that I've chosen to focus on in this book has a lot of simulations in my dreams. I've noticed that I think about what else could have happened.
Interesting.
I think about what might happen in the future. My prediction machine that is my brain takes over and starts running those simulations. In my waking life, though, I also realize there's dreams in a way layered over reality, that those are the stories I tell myself. And those stories program me to expect and look for certain stressors, certain points of attack, certain, especially for me, control, to always be vigilant that someone's trying to control me, someone's trying to take my freedom from me. Why am I drawn to New Mexico? Why do I connect with it in terms of, as you mentioned, there's a feeling of freedom here.
Travis, shut up. I'm just kidding. I'm not trying.
Yeah, you could have set me up.
Triggered. Yeah, yeah.
So that control, I'm always thinking about, how do I escape that? Where I live is dictated by that. Well, in New Mexico's case, I think that's fine. That's a good thing.
I like it.
But it could have gone to some extreme. I could be a mountain man, very lonely and not feeling and lonely and not enjoying life. Just really, really forcing myself outside of a community and outside of society and not knowing why. So the stories I tell myself are, in a sense, dreams that aren't true. And I'm interested in your take on this, that I view them as alternate realities. My reality is actually mine to determine in a lot of ways. That what's true, we're always seeking truth. It's never quite there. But what I choose to believe in, I have to really look back and say, is this story what I want my future to be? Is this what I want my present to be? Why am I reacting that way? How do I change that story? Or how do I realize that was never the case in the first place?
Right. And these waking lives, this waking life moment of dreaming, essentially this daydreaming, this continual prose that's going on in your head, this narration that you define moment by moment, its dynamic nature, you're learning from it. Not the fact that you're asleep, but you're testing experiences and you're testing the outcomes and how you emotionally feel by what you think in this narrative that you're actually creating. So whether it's in the waking state or the dream state, the weight that it carries to the reality of your perspective of who you are and what defines you and the education, the self-educated path of construction of Travis happens through this intangible world. So this thing that, people look at and say, oh, that's, it's not real. I'm sorry about the microphone. I don't know why it's falling off the damn table. This world that, people say isn't real is actually defining how you move in your physical life. So then to say which thing is actually carrying more weight, is it the narrative of the mind in this state of daydreaming, or is it the catalyst of experience that you receive as you're walking around from all these physical things that happen around us? Is that the truth? When really what happens in the mind, the intangible thing, is defining how you walk, act, talk, think, do, emotionally feel, review. And that's what the beauty I have found in dreams. And that's why I think it's one of the greatest tools we can all use, because it's that narrative playground. It's that unbound place of total, joy and free will and capacity for understanding and testing who you really are, as an infinite being. That is your place to not be judged. It is your place to go through and test over and over and over all these emotional charges and experience. And it's not bound by time or space. And nobody can judge you on it. And I think that recording it and taking that self-reflection is just another form of writing that book about who you are, much like what you're doing. Although yours isn't as direct as recording the dream immediately when you wake up, and not fully understanding the context until it's been reviewed over a length of time. But you've taken the narratives in your head and now you've put them down on paper, and you're reflecting on it in somewhat of a sense, but from the daydreaming state. And I think that's a really cool balance to what we're talking about, to the other 45% of life that people typically tend to ignore. And I think you're making that bridge. And I really feel that, again, if I was reading your book, this is what, I would be taking from. This would be my learning experience. This would be me understanding that this is the tool you used to really find out what it means to be human, to be Travis, to be infinite, to really be that I am.
There was this impetus I got to go on this huge road trip in 2016. And I ended up going in 2017. I brought an old car back, not from the dead, but it needed some work.
Yeah.
And it had lived its life here in New Mexico.
Dr. Frankenstein.
I felt a lot of connection to the history there. I've always loved old cars, and there was something to that, something to proving. Again, I thought I had to prove something, that I could do something no one else could do. I had to be special.
Right.
And just saying that now makes me think, what was my motivation for having to be special, having to be different? And then I created this other, not an excuse, but a frame that I wanted to learn from other people.
Right.
And I realized that that was the real intention. That's what I wanted. I wanted to connect. I wanted to learn. And that was just an excuse, was learning American history on the road, going to different backroad towns. All these people were so eager to talk. There was no end to the supply of interviews I could do.
Sure.
Any given rest stop, and especially a talking point for older men was that car. They see an older car that they remember from their childhood, their teenage years, and they're instantly, as opposed to what you would see, bitter old men that don't want to talk to anyone, don't want to share. I couldn't move on fast enough sometimes. I had to limit how much I spoke with them, or how deep I let the conversations go, because they would open up. They felt like they could trust me. There was some point of connection there, and they were so excited to talk to someone. They saw themselves in me, and that's that connection between men that I think we're almost jealous, and we're resentful that other people have that. When I say other people, I just mean other communities, women, that we don't feel like we can relate to each other. And it takes something like that, something special, where we're distrustful. We'll keep the talk very small. We don't get to share what's going on. We don't get to share any pain or distress or struggle we have, or commiserate. And it builds up to that point where we further and further isolate. So it becomes harder to do. It's almost like a negative feedback loop that keeps happening.
It's like I'm sitting in a room and I'm like 2 feet from a person having a conversation, but it's not truly intimate. There's nothing really learned in the conversation. Nothing is actually truly shared. Not even romantically, not even intellectually, not even spiritually. Because it lacks the willingness to open up, to let go, to drop the guard for that moment and just be a human being and just connect. And it's funny, we're so close, but we're so disconnected. And it's a shame that, it comes to that point, but I hope that we can take steps moving forward to bring that non-egotistical, connection back to us and who we are and how we actually share with one another. Share in that moment. You having that old car, much like some other gentleman might have had on your road trip. Share in that enjoyment, the depth, the journey. Speak about, even if it's a parable, I don't care what it is, or an epic, or it doesn't matter. I think we need to bring a little bit of that back, because that myth, that waking myth that we're all supposed to live, we're ignoring it. And I think that is just a travesty to the illusion that we're actually, living in every day. So I'd have to ask you, Travis, what would you recommend that someone do from your own learning, from what you've done with the book so far in your experiences? What would you tell the people listening to focus on? What points or steps or things can they do, not specifically from what you've done, but what can they do to learn or push themselves in the direction of self-awareness, thinking about that ego, thinking about the simplification of things in life, that journey? What would your recommendations be?
There's a tendency, we see it and we admire it, and we almost hold up the people that follow this formula of only telling the positives, only romanticizing their journey in life, and extracting this perfect timeline and perception and identity, and leaving out anything that might be ugly, anything that might be negative. And then when that doesn't feel real, we celebrate when someone, we think it's very courageous when they share one moment of weakness maybe. And I'm not discounting. A lot of that work is excellent. In fact, it probably led me and made it okay for me and my own insecurities to approach this project and just start thinking about myself in this way. But really, when you have a positive memory, what were the other sides of that? Don't wallow in the negativity. But if you have a negative reaction to something, and I'm overusing the term negative, if you feel stress, if you feel sad, if especially fear, you feel that your heart rate rise, you feel that cortisol surge, your vision narrows, you hesitate and you feel nervous. and we disclaim it with things like, oh, it was an awkward moment, you know, can't help it. What an awkward thing. Why is that awkward to you? Lean into that, because for me to reflect on that, and when I'm blushing, when I'm afraid to say something, when I want to get out of a situation, it's not something to avoid. It's something to think through, because otherwise it'll keep happening. So my start was looking for those moments, and that road trip really forced me into some awkward moments. I was leaning into, as a white boy, this deep racist history we have in the U.S. that a lot of history books never talk about, that I never experienced growing up, that I didn't know about. And I had to push into these situations and talk to people about hard things, people of color, women, and really ask, what are the things I don't know? And how can I be honest about not knowing them? How can I be honest that this is my perception without fear of judgment? But getting to that point of trust requires me first being comfortable to challenge myself. So that the whole journey for me was all these prompts to say, why do I feel this way in these situations? Why do I feel like I just have to survive, that I don't have enough, that I'm not able to do this, or I'm not going to make it, that I had that crazy perception that I was going to die even. I mean, what is that feeling from? There's something in my past. There's some explanation for that. And it feels overwhelming. It feels like you can't explain it, but there's something in there. If you feel overwhelmed on your own, that's what friends are for. That's what therapists are for. That's what your community's for, and your family, however you define family. I really believe that there's ways to understand all of this, and you don't need to go it alone in that sense.
Travis, I feel like you and I really feel like family.
Cheers.
Yeah, I appreciate I don't care if you don't feel the same. I feel that way.
I do. That's why we're able to flow like this. So
Yeah.
you're always confronting some of the abstract concepts of how to explore, how to self-discover.
Yeah.
And those help me frame my own discovery. You have very confident views on how this process works.
Sure.
I believe it maps to an individual in very different ways. But these tools of thinking about your dreams, looking for signals within them, looking for signals within your own life, your waking, your dreaming life, your general journey. These are all tools. And what's in your toolbox? It might be a little different, but it'll fix anything you're struggling with. I
typically use a hammer and a huge pipe wrench to get through whatever I got to take care of, even if it's delicate.
How very masculine of you.
Yeah, how very masculine of me. No, it's fantastic. But Travis, I really appreciate you coming on the show. I'd love to have you back on anytime you want. And I thank you again for sharing this journey, teaching others, so that they can learn from it, and then they can share their experiences with us, and then we can find that reflection, right? See that mirror between all of us, and then we can really learn from it.
Thank you for having me, Alex, and making me feel comfortable enough to share and having this forum.
Yeah.
This makes it possible.
Anytime. And just a reminder to all of our listeners, all is one, and we appreciate you tuning into Higher Density Living, and we'll see you next week.
Cheers.
Thank you.
All is one.